I've been meaning to do this video since last year. Hi, I'm Macy and I'm the artist and designer behind Mualcaina, a small business focused on anime and kawaii merch. I've ended at 39 events so far, my biggest being Anime Expo, Fanime, and Anime Central. This year I've ended at 18 events, 8 of them being conventions and 10 being a food or craft market. I did focus on multiple day events and I don't think I actually ever did a one-day event this year compared to last year, which was a mix of one-day and multi-day events. My goal was to see which of the bigger events made more sense for me now that I have a more established product catalog and could afford to invest in longer events. Just a disclaimer, how one views an event as successful is relative. In my case, I am judging these events based on revenue, in addition to details such as communication, staff, and overall experience. Now I'm ranking these events from S to D. D for would not do again, maybe ever. C would consider in the future, but not at the moment. B, satisfied, would do again if I need to fill my event calendar. A, very satisfied, would do again and make space for it on my calendar. And finally, S, I will do anything to get into these events again if the Artist Alley gods will take me. Now starting with my first event of 2023, Anime Los Angeles. This con is located at the Long Beach Convention Center and is typically the first Thursday to Sunday of January. Admittedly, not a lot of artists do well at this con. Besides the typical reasons as to why an artist may not do well at a convention, one of the main questions I would ask is, did you have ribbons? Could it be annoying to need an additional incentive for someone to purchase from you when you could just sell? Sure. But this is a convention with a very heavy ribbon culture, and if you don't play the game, then you're just leaving money on the table. I'm semi-local to this 4-day con and did well that I would go again, even with hotel costs. To be honest, even if I flew, I would be really happy with the amount I made at this con. I believe it's because you had to purchase something $15 or more to receive a ribbon from my shop, and you just couldn't trade for them. Some like to have games where to obtain a ribbon, you do a particular dance, answer a question, or order in an uwu voice, for example. I personally like to keep it simple by just making it a $15 plus purchase, since I do have a few ribbon designs. Another issue is that since this convention is one of the first immediately after the holidays, there may be some no-shows with attendees and artists and exhibitors just because this is also a time that a lot of people do get sick. I'll also say that it was a bit of a pain with the table situation this year. You can watch my vlog to see how that all went down. However, the revenue that I made at this convention was definitely worth it, putting this on the A tier. The following weekend after ALA, I had Anime Impulse LA, which is located at the Pomona Fairplex. I'm referring to the LA one because they did open up several locations in the Bay Area, SD, and OC, and this is the only one that happened to work with my schedule this year. Typically, LA is one of the better performing Impulse locations as this is the original one, plus it does have the Asian American Expo, and that particular event attracts a lot of attendees. If you're not familiar, there's multiple smaller events occurring within the convention. There's Anime Impulse, K-Playfest, Sneaker Expo, and Asian American Expo, and your ticket cost allows access to all of them, so it really is a good deal for attendees. I do have family nearby, so my major cost is just limited to table fee and helper. I would say that revenue was okay, and I did hit my minimum baseline and a little more, but I reckon it's because there is some intersection between attendees from ALA and Impulse since they are about an hour from each other. I do remember hearing a lot of comments on how they did see me from ALA. This was also the weekend where we had a rainstorm, so the roof was leaking, and it damaged a lot of artist products. I would say that this event would be ranked a lot lower if it did happen to us, but luckily, we were far from that leaky roof. I will say that this is the most difficult Impulse location to get into for Artist Alley, just because previous LA artists do have priority booking over general artists who have never vended at this location, and usually the previous artists tend to get most, if not all, of the available tables for the following year. I would list this under the B tier. After Impulse, I did take several months off of events and returned to my first out-of-state convention, Anime Las Vegas. This con was at the expo at the World Market Center, and honestly, it was my worst event of the entire year. ALV is under the NerdBot event umbrella, which is home to Anime Pasadena and Anime Riverside. This 2-day con was a first-time event, but it had a really poor vendor to attendee ratio since they did have a lot of vendors for the amount of attendees that actually went to the event. Now, I was taking a risk with it being its first time at this location, but I figured it'd be fine since it wasn't too far from LA, and if I didn't profit that much, at least it's not too far. I did learn that Las Vegas events don't usually do well unless it's level up, and I also just really didn't like the table situation with this event. Again, you can watch the vlog up here. Personally, I don't think I would do this event again when their two other events, Pasadena and Riverside, perform a lot better for me and are local, so at that point I can just keep my costs low and know that those events will do well. Putting this on the D tier. Also add that I do give more details about the events that I'm gonna be mentioning in this video in this playlist with all of my vlogs, so if you are interested, they're all up here. The only one that I don't have a video of is the second weekend of 626 OC, but that's because I didn't have my SD card and that's my fault. Going into May, it was a very jam-packed event calendar. I don't want to do that again. And I pretty much did 3 consecutive non-local events, so very fun. The first event of that month was Foodieland Cal Expo, which is located at the Cal Expo Fairgrounds in Sacramento. I wanted to try Foodieland since I did hear some good things from vendor friends who said that they did well last year. However, I felt like there was just too much of a general interest at this event, at least compared to myself who does sell pretty specific anime kawaii products. And what I mean is that the only underlying interest of the attendees is food. And while, of course, when you go to Foodieland or any food market, you're just there for the food, and I totally understand that. However, while people attend food markets for food and not merch shopping, at least compared to 626 Night Market, for example, it is Asian culture focused, so that is a good example of a food market that aligns with my catalog. I was hoping that the Foodieland attendees would be interested in mainstream anime and kawaii merch, but it was honestly just a small amount and I was really better off not making the drive up. It was also really hot. Usually it's a lot cooler up north versus in SoCal, but because we were too inland, that the heat was just incredibly unbearable even in mid-May. Probably won't do again, D tier. Right after Foodieland, I went straight into prep before I flew out to Chicago for Anime Central. This 3-day con is at the Donald E. Stevens Convention Center and is one of the largest anime cons in Chicago and the Midwest. This con does not allow the sale of adhesive items like stickers, since past attendees did sticker vandalize the con center, so ASIN just outright banned them. Even without my stickers, I did really well at this event. It was stressful since I was soloing and it was a pain going through O'Hare Airport with all of my luggage, but honestly, it was worth it. I also loved how they provided an 8-foot table since standard artist alley tables are typically 6 feet, and I was also pleasantly surprised by the number of attendees who said they've bought from my shop or knew me from social media and were generally surprised to see me there. It was also my fault for not advertising my being there enough since I did have a lot going on at the time. I'll also add that this con had some of the kindest attendees. Literally everyone that I've come across was very kind and friendly. I also did this event solo, and while I was struggling mentally, to be honest, just because I just went through so much, selling wise, it was relatively manageable, and at least during the event, I wasn't that stressed. The stress mostly came before and after the event, to be honest. This was a pretty busy event, so I would prefer not to do it solo again and get a helper, but mostly for luggage help and to be able to bring more inventory rather than shipping it to the con or to the hotel. Since I did have Fanime the following weekend and I needed to fly back to LA to prep before I drove to NorCal, I did have to fly on the last day of ASIN, and I did miss about 2 hours of the convention. I honestly think I lost out on a couple $1,000s because of it, and I low-key regret it and honestly should have flown the following day, but I was already in a very stressful situation, so that was me choosing between a few $1,000s and my peace of mind, so ASIN is definitely in the S tier. Moving on to the following weekend, here we have Fanime. This Jade convention is located at the San Jose McHenry Convention Center in San Jose, California. This is the only convention from my experience that has continued to enforce masks. It is really difficult to get in since it is a juried convention, and even if you do get in one year, you're not guaranteed to get in the following year. But if you are accepted, you really should do it. I do keep my weekend open just in case I get into Fanime, but if not, then I have Memorial Day weekend to myself. I will say though, especially if you're on the East Coast, this is a schedule conflict for those of you who do want to get into MomoCon, which is a big convention in Atlanta, Georgia. I would say that earnings-wise, I did a few thousand more than ASIN, which is a bit expected since this is a 4-day con versus ASIN, which is a 3-day con. And I am able to bring more inventory at Fanime since I drove versus me flying to Chicago. Fanime is a con worth flying into since there is a good amount of attendees and is one of the few anime cons in NorCal besides SAC Anime. While I did do this event solo, I would prefer not to do that again if I get into the following year since it can get hectic. I was lucky in that I had a lot of artist friends who were willing to stand behind my booth temporarily while I ran to the restroom. This is also the con that doesn't allow helpers to make financial transactions in your place unless you add them to your permit, which I don't know how to do that, so I didn't do that. Typically my events in NorCal tend to do well, and I feel that at this point I have established a customer base after vending in the San Jose area several times. Definitely placing this on the S tier. Moving on to my only June event is 626 Night Market OC. This 3-day night market is located at the OC Fair and Event Center, and I've noticed that Father's Day weekend 626 OC tends to be one of the better 626 OCs. Since it is in June, it's not too hot yet since it tends to be gloomy in the beginning of summer. You are able to get a parking pass that will cover the entire 3-day weekend. However, you can only get it before the event starts on Friday, and if you wait until after, it isn't available anymore and you do have to pay full price each day, which, I mean, there must be a lot of reasons for that. I know that usually for most events, parking is managed by the event center and not necessarily night market or just the event itself, and they're kind of separate things, but I don't understand that. I think they're just assuming that attendees might get lost and they'll park in that parking area instead, but I feel like there's a better way to do that. Again, I'm not an event planner and I'm only really a vendor, so I don't know all the logistics on that end, but I feel like there's a better way, unless they just want profit. Capitalism, am I right? As with most night markets now, you do need to bring your own table, chairs, and canopy, as well as purchase event insurance. To be honest, at least for me, for this weekend I did decently well, but I've learned to treat 626 Night Market, especially like their OC events, as for marketing purposes. Just because I remember from my first anime expo, a lot of people would comment on how they saw me at 626 OC. In my opinion, I feel like this event also has somewhat silly hours as it does start 4 p.m., but it doesn't really pick up until 7. And it ends at 11 p.m. I would place 626 OC for this particular weekend in the B tier. Moving into July, here we have my baby, my precious baby, Anime Expo. For me, it has the best of both worlds. 1, it is local, and number 2, it is one of the largest anime conventions in the United States. AX does make up a large portion of my 2023 con revenue, which makes sense since this con completely aligns with my target audience, and I also have no problem restocking inventory because, again, I am local. It is growing more and more difficult to get in since nearly everyone wants to vend there because of the potential revenue, and starting last year, they do have a Jade app process for new artists. It's definitely a con where more likely than not, you're going to need a helper because the attendance is no joke. I will add that starting next year, they will not be allowing shared tables. What that means is that in the past, you could have a max of 2 artists at your table. So on a 6-foot table, you can split like 3 feet per artist. However, I honestly don't understand the reason as to why they're limiting shared tables, especially since being able to list who the secondary artist is going to be definitely allows them some control. I don't share tables, however, I do know of some people who secretly share tables, and even though there's only one artist name on the table, it's actually 2 people selling. And I feel that completely taking out the shared table option for next year's Anime Expo gives AX less control over which artists will be at those tables. I did hear from the Annie Discord that it might have been because they're trying to limit which shared tables might have AI art, but I feel like this gives them less control over which artists are in Artist Alley, but I mean, we'll see how it goes. I don't know. In the case of helpers, I typically have 1 helper with me, but for this one, because of how hectic it is, I definitely need to. I did mention this in my AX vlog, but this is one of the main cons that a lot of anime fans attend if they are going to one anime convention in the entire year. And a lot of them save up all year just to spend at this one event. This is also one of the more strict conventions where they will measure your display to ensure it's within height limit, among other things. And while I didn't run into this issue myself, some artists did have to deal with security prohibiting food, despite AX saying it's allowed, especially for vendors and attendees. And because it is in the middle of LA summer, it can get really hot and gross in Artist Alley since it is located in Kensha Hall, which is a parking structure, so the air isn't as circulated as an exhibitor hall, and it can get pretty stuffy if you don't have some type of fan, even though there is AC just because there's so many people inside. Personally, I would give this a 1 million out of 10, just because of the large chunk of revenue. I'm placing AX as number 1 on the S tier. Now, combining the two events that I did during AX and immediately after AX is 626 Night Market Arcadia. The Arcadia location is the main and original one of the 3 major 626 night markets. This was the first Arcadia 626 of the summer, so I feel like everyone is just newly excited about food markets and summer plans, which is why there was a healthy attendance number during these first 2 weekends. This event is located at the Santa Anita racetrack, and similar to 626 OC, you do have to bring your own equipment, so table, chairs, canopy. Luckily, parking is free, and if you want to eat prior to the event, there is a mall across the street. It is a local event for me, so my major costs are limited to table fee and my helper. I would consider doing this event on this particular weekend again, however, it usually falls the same weekend or the weekend after Anime Expo, and I don't want to double book again. It was very stressful, it was very painful, I don't want to do that again. Even if both events were local to me, they're still pretty far apart. Like Arcadia is probably 40 minutes, 50 minutes from LA, and I don't want to do that again. It is a good alternative if you're local and you didn't get into AX, since it also felt like some AX attendees went to 626 for dinner post-con. However, 626 is not always a good event if you mainly sell prints, since attendees are there for food, and they may be reluctant to purchase from you since they don't want to get it dirty, even if you have a bag. I feel like this is more so a good event if you have mainstream anime / kawaii items like Sanrio, and their smaller items like enamel pins and stickers, because I would categorize most of the attendees as those who may like anime, but might not like it enough to go to an anime convention, or the only con they attend is AX. I feel like the only reason why I get eat a bag and corduroy bag sales at this particular event is because customers already knew me prior, and again are familiar with my brand already, so they actually sought out to see me at this event and not necessarily walking past and thought, you know what, I'll get a bag. And I feel like print artists like Kehasuk do well because their art covers popular anime, and it is a style that a lot of normies may also be interested in. I'll also add that of all of the 626s, heck, all of my events, this particular location is the one with the most frequent theft. I honestly can't count the number of vendor friends who've told me that someone stole their merch, their phone, cash from their cash box. There's also one instance where a man tried to confuse me by asking for change, but he ended up walking away because I wouldn't give him the change because the transaction didn't make any sense. So I would just keep an eye out for that. Apparently it gets worse every year, so. I would put these particular weekends for 626 Night Market Arcadia in the B tier. Later in July, I drove up to NorCal for 626 Night Market Pleasanton. This 3-day event was my best performing 626 out of the 3 main locations. Again, it's Arcadia, Pleasanton, and OC, which is why I signed up for it again this year for their July weekend. Supposedly this weekend was a bit slower than last year, but even then my numbers were actually pretty good. Compared to the other 626 night markets, this location has 1 entrance and exit, and they're also in the same area, so you're pretty much guaranteed to have some passing traffic at least twice. Usually a lot of attendees say they'll come back but forget to stop by. However, having 1 exit point and 1 entrance means they may remember to buy from you when they're headed out. My only issue are the hours. On Saturday and Sunday, it starts at 1 p.m. and ends at 11, which again, personally, I feel like it's unnecessary since most people don't really come in until 7 p.m. Pleasanton does have another weekend in May, but it's Memorial Day weekend, and honestly, I'd rather reserve it for a potential fanime appearance. I would rank this particular event on the A tier. Moving on into August, we have 626 Night Market OC again. In addition to my points made a few weeks ago, this particular weekend was just not it. At this point, I think people were just starting to get burnt out from all the night markets and the food markets from the summer. And this was later in the month that a lot of people were going back to school. So the attendance was just really low, especially for a night market. From this point, I don't think I'm going to be doing any more night markets past August, putting this particular weekend on the D tier. Soon after OC, I had 626 Night Market Arcadia again. Labor Day weekend 626 was honestly my worst 626 because it rained that Friday and people just did not want to go out at the time. It was surprising since it was a holiday weekend, and I did have friends say that 626 Labor Day weekend last year was their best 626. It was also insanely hot. Usually September is one of the hottest periods in LA from my experience, and I'm not that great with really warm weather. Even if I was under a canopy and had a neck fan, it felt like I was being burned alive. What's helpful is that you are able to leave your equipment for the following weekend for this location. I usually just leave my canopy and tables, while some people may leave their stock, but I just did not feel comfortable doing that. I do like 626 staff. I feel like they're usually more friendly or helpful than other event staff, in my opinion, especially for night markets. It's just been unfortunate that their later events don't do that well, and I think it's just an oversaturation of food night markets in the area. I would put both 626 Arcadia September weekends in the D tier. A couple weeks later, I drove down to San Diego for Foodieland San Diego. This event is located at the Del Mar Fairgrounds and was just really awful for me in general, and it turned me off to any Foodieland event. I will say that their May SD Foodieland was good from what I've heard, so I think people were just getting tired of night markets now that summer is over and they're back to work. Again, Foodieland just does not align with my target audience, so I don't think I'll be vending there again. It was only nice because I did get to see my friends and the weather wasn't as irritating as the months prior, putting this on the D tier. After Foodieland, I went on an event hiatus and returned to Anime Expo Chibi in November. This 2-day con subset of Anime Expo is located at the Ontario Convention Center, and this is in SoCal, by the way. I know some people were confused and thought it was in Canada. Regular Artist Alley does have a 6-foot table, however, I got a spot for their 8x8 Artist Alley space, which is more expensive. I was irritated in the beginning because I did arrive to find a 6-foot table in my space when we were promised an 8-foot table. But luckily we did end up finding an 8-foot table, so it is what it is. Similar to ALA, a lot of artists do not do well at this con. However, my sales are a lot better at Chibi versus some of the other 2-day cons I've done, like Impulse. And I also have family nearby, so my major cost is table fee and helper. I might go for the 6-foot table next year instead, since it is in the same vicinity as the 8-foot tables anyway, and regular Artist Alley doesn't have to pay for additional insurance. I feel like I probably did well at Chibi because I didn't do Anime Pasadena, which was the weekend prior, and there is an intersection of attendees between the two since Pasadena is about 50 minutes away from Ontario. This event is still going through some growing pains since it is only in its 2nd year, so I wouldn't recommend it unless you're local or you have enough funds to take the risk. I'm putting Chibi on the A tier. While I will be focusing on anime/Asian culture specific events for next year, this following event is going to be one that I am definitely going to try to sign up for next year. SJ Made Holiday Fair is a 2-day event located at the Santa Clara Convention Center, and I did really well at this event for a non-anime con. I did drive to this event since I do have to bring my own tables and chairs. However, they did have an option to rent tables. The only downside is that it's on Black Friday and Small Business Saturday, and because I am driving from LA, I would have to miss Thanksgiving. Since there isn't much to do at this event besides shop, attendees are literally only there to buy things. While I did get a couple hagglers, and side note, please don't do that, it's really rude, even if an item is out of your budget. Most of the customers there did not question the price, and I don't recall anyone saying, "That's so expensive," out loud. So that's a win in my book. And I feel like it's because they understand that at this event we're all small businesses, so they're here to support. It's also pretty nice because we're not far from Silicon Valley, and I did end up getting an invite for a company holiday market for one of the major tech companies. I think it's because someone got my business card during SJ Made, but unfortunately I do have to miss it because I won't be able to make the drive up from SoCal. Honestly, it would have been an amazing networking opportunity, but hopefully next year. I did make a good amount for a 2-day event, actually more so than AXChibi, that I honestly would not have minded flying here. Definitely putting SJ Made Holiday Fair on the A tier. Moving on to my December event, LA Comic Con. I signed up for this event because I enjoyed it last year since I did get to meet Simu Liu, also just did decently well for a local con. It's located at the LA Convention Center and is at the same venue as AX. This is one of my few non-anime cons, and based on my revenue, if I did a smaller local Comic-Con, I don't think I'd be happy with my numbers. My costs were low because I'm local and I did do okay at this event this year, but it was significantly lower than last year. This year, I did make several hundred less than last year, and this year I had more Ita bags, crew necks, and pins, and basically bigger items, in addition to running a stamp rally, which is saying a lot, because if the attendance was the same as last year, I would have been estimated to make more this year. Honestly, I think the attendance was really low this year because of the economy, in addition to the guest list. While there were notable celebrity guests, I don't think they had as much of a pool as last year. I'll also say that not every artist has had the same experience. From what I've heard with other Artist Alley people, some had a difficult time with staff as they were being moved around to a different table last minute and were not informed prior. A lot of other artists barely broke even, and I don't think this is the event for you if you're new to Artist Alley. You might want to consider this event if you primarily have Western influence in your art, like comics, Marvel, DC, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and so on. Although I did okay numbers-wise at LACC, next year I just plan to cut down on events since I really burnt myself out, and I'd rather much focus on events where I did really well so I can take actual breaks on the weekends. I might sign up for this con in the future if I needed to, but I think I'm just not going to do so next year. Putting LACC on the C tier. After hearing all of this, would you apply for any of these events? Did one of the results surprise you, or did you have the opposite experience for one of these? I'm hoping to make this into an annual reflection as I figure out which events are best suited for my work, and perhaps you can get ideas on which events you may want to consider. It can be a struggle to design your Artist Alley table display, and if you need some ideas, watch this video where I review viewers' Artist Alley displays.